The wind howled across the Blue Ridge Mountains, clawing at Margaret Stevens' wool shawl as she stepped onto the cabin's front porch. At 73, she had learned to read the warnings in the air, how the particular silence before a storm settled over the pines, how the cold bit differently when snow threatened to bury everything in its path. This morning felt different, though, Condom. Something moved in the snowdrift near her mailbox. Margaret squinted through the gray dawn light and her breath forming small clouds in the frigid air. What she had initially mistaken for a fallen branch was actually a person curled into a fetal position, nearly buried under the fresh snow that had fallen throughout the night. "Dear Lord in heaven," Margaret whispered her grandmother's prayer, instinctively escaping her lips as she hurried down the porch steps, worn boots crunching through snow that reached nearly to her knees. The figure was a young woman, maybe 25, with dark hair matted against her pale face. Her lips had taken on a frightening blue tinge, and her breathing came in shallow, irregular gasps. What stopped Margaret's heart was the obvious swell of pregnancy beneath the woman's inadequate jacket. Judging by the size, she was at least 8 months along. "Can you hear me?" Margaret knelt in the snow, ignoring the cold seeping through her flannel nightgown. She pressed weathered fingers to the woman's neck, finding a pulse that was weak but steady. "We need to get you inside right now." Margaret hadn't carried anything heavier than firewood in years, but adrenaline and decades of farm work gave her strength she hadn't known still resided in her aging body. Step by careful step, she managed to get the unconscious woman up the porch steps and through the front door. The warmth of the cabin's interior hit them both like a wall. Margaret's wood stove had been burning all night, keeping the small space comfortably heated against the mountain winter. She laid the woman on her sofa, quickly gathering every blanket she owned. "Stay with me, honey," Margaret murmured, as she worked to remove the woman's wet clothes, replacing them with her own dry flannel pajamas and thick wool socks. The woman's skin was so cold it felt like touching marble. Margaret's hands moved with practiced efficiency, a muscle memory she hadn't accessed in 40 years, returning as naturally as breathing. She checked for signs of frostbite, monitored the woman's breathing, and felt for the baby's movement beneath the stretched skin of her belly. Everything she had learned during her years as a nurse and midwife came flooding back, though she deliberately avoided using the specialized midwifery techniques she had once been famous for. From her bedroom closet, Margaret retrieved a wooden box she hadn't opened in decades. Inside, wrapped in faded tissue paper, lay her husband Robert's old military coat. The heavy wool garment had kept him warm through 2 tours of duty, and she had kept it all these years because letting it go felt like losing him all over again. She draped the coat over the unconscious woman, tucking it carefully around her swollen belly. The weight and warmth of the garment seemed to bring color back to the woman's face almost immediately. As Margaret prepared warm broth in her kitchen, she studied her unexpected guest. The woman's clothes, though wet and worn, were clean. Her fingernails were short but well-maintained. This wasn't someone who had been living rough for long. Whatever circumstances had brought her to Margaret's doorstep in the middle of a blizzard, they were recent and desperate. On the mantelpiece, the antique clock that had once belonged to Margaret's mother-in-law remained frozen at 3:27, the exact moment when the call had come about Rebecca 43 years ago. She had never had the heart to restart it, allowing the timepiece to mark that moment when her world had stopped turning. The woman's eyes fluttered open just as Margaret returned with a steaming mug of chicken broth. Fear immediately filled those brown eyes, and she struggled to sit up, hands instinctively moving to protect her belly. "Easy, sweetheart," Margaret said, setting the mug on her coffee table and raising both hands to show she meant no harm. "You're safe. I found you outside in the snow. You nearly froze to death." "I need to go," the woman whispered, her voice hoarse and weak. "I can't stay here." "The storm isn't stopping anytime soon," Margaret replied matter-of-factly. "And in your condition, you're not going anywhere until I'm sure you and that baby are both healthy." The woman's eyes darted around the small cabin, taking in the quilts hanging on the walls, the photographs of people long gone, the general sense of a life lived fully and alone. "You don't understand. I don't have any money. I can't pay you." Margaret sat down in her rocking chair, the same chair where she had nursed Rebecca 43 years ago. "Did I ask for money? No, but then we don't have a problem." Margaret picked up the mug of broth and held it out. "Now drink this before it gets cold. You're eating for 2, and from the looks of you, neither one of you has had a proper meal in quite some time." Amanda Lewis had never been inside a home that felt so completely at peace with itself. As she sipped the warm broth Margaret had prepared, She studied the small cabin with the careful attention of someone who had learned that safe spaces were temporary gifts, not permanent promises. The walls were lined with hand-sewn quilts and patterns that spoke of patience and skill passed down through generations. A stone fireplace dominated one wall, its mantel crowded with photographs of people who smiled with the easy confidence of those who had never doubted their place in the world. Books filled every available shelf, their spines worn smooth by countless readings. "How long have you lived here?" Amanda asked, her voice still rough from the cold that had nearly claimed her life. 43 years come spring," Margaret replied, settling back into her rocking chair with her own mug of tea. "My husband Robert and I bought this place right after we married. He passed 15 years ago." Amanda noticed the way Margaret's eyes softened when she mentioned her husband, the way her fingers unconsciously twisted the simple gold band she still wore. Some loves, Amanda realized, were strong enough to outlast death itself. "I should leave as soon as the storm passes," Amanda said quietly. "I don't want to be a burden." Margaret's laugh was gentle but firm. "Child, you're 8 months pregnant and nearly died of exposure less than an hour ago. You're not going anywhere until that baby is born healthy, and you're both strong enough to face whatever comes next." The certainty in Margaret's voice both comforted and terrified Amanda. She had grown accustomed to people who offered help with conditions-attached kindness that came with expiration dates clearly marked. Margaret's unconditional acceptance felt too good to be real. "You don't even know my name." "Then tell me." "Amanda Lewis." "Well, Amanda Lewis, I'm Margaret Stevens, and this is your home for as long as you need it to be." Margaret rose from her chair with the deliberate movements of someone who had learned to accommodate an aging body without surrendering to it. She walked to a cedar chest tucked beneath the cabin's single window and lifted its heavy lid with reverent care. Inside, wrapped in tissue paper that crackled with age, lay baby clothes in soft yellows and greens. Tiny sleepers with pearl buttons, hand-knitted blankets in intricate patterns, receiving blankets embroidered with flowers and birds. Each piece had been preserved with the meticulous care of someone who understood their sacred significance. "These were my daughters," Margaret said softly, lifting a miniature sweater that could have fit in the palm of her hand. "And before that, they were mine." Amanda felt tears sting her eyes. The clothes were beautiful, obviously expensive, but more than that, they represented something she had given up hoping for. They represented a family that planned for children, that prepared for their arrival with joy instead of fear. "I can't take these," Amanda whispered. "They're too precious." "They're meant for babies," Margaret replied practically. "What good are they doing, folded away in a chest? Baby clothes are meant to be worn, not preserved like museum pieces." She pulled out a hand-carved wooden cradle, its surface polished smooth by time and loving care. The craftsmanship was exquisite, with tiny flowers carved into the headboard and gentle curves that spoke of countless hours of patient work. "Robert made this before our Rebecca was born," Margaret explained, running her fingers along the cradle's edge. "His hands were better with wood than they ever were with words. This was how he told us he loved us." Amanda watched Margaret's face as she spoke about her daughter, noting the past tense and the shadow that crossed her eyes. There was a story there, a painful one, but Amanda had learned not to push for information that wasn't freely offered. "The small room upstairs would make a perfect nursery," Margaret continued, seemingly unaware of Amanda's observation. "Gets the morning sun, and it's warm even in winter. We can set up the cradle there, make it ready." "Margaret," Amanda began, struggling to find words for the overwhelming gratitude that threatened to choke her. "Why are you doing this? You don't owe me anything. You don't even know me." Margaret was quiet for a long moment, still holding the tiny sweater. When she finally spoke, her voice carried the weight of old pain and new hope. "Sometimes we get chances to make things right. Sometimes life gives us opportunities to be the person someone needed us to be, even if we can't go back and change what came before." Amanda didn't understand what Margaret meant, but she could hear the truth in her voice, the deep conviction that went beyond mere kindness. Whatever had brought Margaret to this moment of radical generosity, it was rooted in something more complex than simple charity. "Thank you," Amanda whispered, the words inadequate for the magnitude of what was being offered. "No need for thanks," Margaret replied. "Just rest now. You're going to need your strength for what's coming." The fire crackled softly in the stone fireplace as evening settled over the mountain cabin. Amanda sat curled on the sofa, wrapped in one of Margaret's hand-stitched quilts, watching her host prepare dinner with the unhurried efficiency of someone who had been cooking for herself for many years. "Tell me about yourself," Margaret said, as she stirred a pot of vegetable soup that filled the cabin with the warm scents of carrots and herbs. "Where did you come from before you ended up in my snowdrift?" Amanda's hands instinctively moved to her belly where the baby had been unusually active since she'd warmed up. "Phoenix. I was living with my boyfriend there until 3 weeks ago." "What happened 3 weeks ago?" "He decided he wasn't ready to be a father." Amanda's voice carried the flat tone of someone who had rehearsed painful facts until they lost their sting. "Actually, he decided he wasn't ready to be a father to my baby. Apparently, he was perfectly ready to be a father to his ex-girlfriend's baby." Margaret's stirring never paused, but Amanda noticed the slight tightening around her eyes. "I see. And your family?" "My parents died in a car accident when I was 16. I've been on my own since then." Amanda pulled the quilt tighter around her shoulders. "I thought I had built something stable with David. We lived together for 2 years. I thought he loved me." "Sometimes we love people who aren't capable of loving us back the way we deserve," Margaret said gently. "That doesn't make our love wrong. It just makes their inability tragic." There was something in Margaret's tone that suggested personal experience with such tragedy. Amanda studied the older woman's profile as she ladled soup into bowls, noting the careful way she had arranged her life around solitude. "What about you?" Amanda asked. "You mentioned a daughter." Margaret's hand stilled for just a moment before she continued serving. "Rebecca. She would have been 43 this year." The past tense hung in the air between them like smoke. Amanda felt her heart clench with understanding and regret for asking. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I shouldn't have." "It's all right." Margaret carried their bowls to the small dining table that sat beneath a window overlooking the snow-covered pines. It was a long time ago, and talking about her keeps her memory alive. They ate in comfortable silence for several minutes before Margaret spoke again, her voice steady but distant. "Rebecca was 17 when she got pregnant. This was 1983 and things were different then. Less understanding, less support for young mothers." Margaret's spoon moved slowly through her soup. "Her father and we weren't as compassionate as we should have been. We were worried about appearances, about what people would think." Amanda felt a chill that had nothing to do with the weather outside. She could see where this story was heading, could recognize the weight of regret in Margaret's careful words. "We sent her to stay with my sister in Denver. Told everyone she was taking a semester off to help with my sister's new business." Margaret's eyes focused on something far beyond the cabin walls. "The plan was for her to give the baby up for adoption and come home like nothing had happened." "But that's not what happened." "No." Margaret's voice grew quieter. "Rebecca hemorrhaged during delivery. The baby lived, but Rebecca died 3 days later from complications they couldn't stop." Amanda reached across the table and covered Margaret's hand with her own. The older woman's fingers were cold despite the warmth of the cabin. "The worst part," Margaret continued, "was that she died believing we were ashamed of her, believing that her pregnancy was something shameful that needed to be hidden away. And the baby, Rebecca's baby, a little girl, Rebecca named her Hope." Margaret's smile was sad but genuine. "She was adopted by a wonderful family in Colorado. She's a teacher, now has 3 children of her own. She sends me a Christmas card every year." Amanda began to understand the depth of Margaret's generosity, the profound motivation behind her immediate acceptance of a pregnant stranger. This wasn't simple kindness. This was atonement. Margaret reached for a framed photograph that sat on the mantelpiece, bringing it back to the table. The picture showed a young woman with Margaret's intelligent eyes and a smile that radiated confidence and joy. She wore a graduation cap and gown, her arms around a couple who looked at her with unmistakable pride. "This was taken the day before she told us about the pregnancy," Margaret said softly. "She had just graduated high school, had a scholarship to nursing school. She wanted to be a midwife, help other women through childbirth." Amanda studied the photograph, seeing echoes of Margaret in the young woman's face, but also seeing something else, the same mix of determination and vulnerability that Amanda recognized in her own mirror. "She looks like she would have been an amazing mother," Amanda said. "I think so too. And I think she would have wanted me to help you to make sure your story has a different ending than hers did." Amanda felt tears threatening again, they overwhelmed by the magnitude of Margaret's gift. This wasn't charity. This was a chance for redemption for both of them. The days that followed settled into a rhythm that surprised Amanda with its gentle predictability. Margaret awoke each morning at sunrise, moving quietly through the cabin as she prepared coffee and checked the wood stove. Amanda would emerge from the small upstairs room to find breakfast waiting and Margaret ready to share whatever domestic wisdom the day required. Cooking is about more than following recipes, Margaret explained as she guided Amanda through the preparation of homemade bread. It's about understanding how ingredients work together, how they change under different conditions. Amanda's hands were clumsy at first, unused to the patient kneading that bread required. But Margaret's gentle corrections and steady encouragement gradually built her confidence. The kitchen filled with the yeasty smell of rising dough and the comfortable sounds of two women working side by side. My grandmother kept all her recipes in this box, Margaret said, pulling out a wooden container worn smooth by decades of handling. The box was filled with index cards covered in faded handwriting, some splattered with ingredients from countless cooking sessions. Amanda lifted one of the cards, studying the careful script that documented a recipe for apple pie. The margins were filled with notes. Add extra cinnamon in winter. Robert prefers less sugar. Rebecca's favorite for her birthday. These aren't just recipes, Amanda observed. They're family history. Every dish tells a story, Margaret agreed. Food is how we show love, how we mark celebrations, how we comfort each other through difficult times. As the days passed, the phone rang with increasing frequency. Margaret's conversations were brief and guarded, her responses revealing little about who was calling or why. After one particularly tense call, Margaret hung up with unusual force, her mouth set in a thin line. Is everything all right? Amanda asked, concern evident in her voice. Just people with opinions they think I need to hear, Margaret replied, the tightness in her voice betraying her discomfort. Small towns have long memories and even longer tongues. Amanda understood then that news of her presence in Margaret's cabin had begun to spread through the community. Margaret was facing judgment for harboring a stranger, a pregnant one at that. The parallel to her daughter's situation wasn't lost on Amanda, and she felt a surge of protectiveness toward the woman who had shown her such unquestioning kindness. Maybe I should go, Amanda suggested. I don't want to cause problems for you. Margaret's response was immediate and firm. You're not going anywhere. What happened to Rebecca happened because I cared more about what people thought than what my daughter needed. I won't make that mistake again. The following morning brought a visitor. Amanda was upstairs resting when she heard a vehicle approach, followed by a firm knock on the door. From her window, she could see an older model Jeep Cherokee with Dr. Thomas Wilson Family Medicine stenciled on the driver's arm. Margaret's voice floated up the stairs, warmer and more animated than Amanda had heard it before. Thomas, thank you for coming all this way in this weather. When you called and said you had a pregnant woman staying with you, wild horses couldn't have kept me away. The man's voice was deep and carried the slight drawl common to the region. How far along is she? About 8 months, I'd say. Healthy movement, good color now that she's warmed up, but I'd feel better if you checked her over. Amanda made her way carefully down the stairs, one hand on her belly, the other gripping the railing. The man standing in Margaret's living room was tall and broad-shouldered, with silver hair and kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. He wore a plaid flannel shirt under a well-worn leather jacket, and he carried a medical bag that looked like it had seen decades of use. You must be Amanda, he said, his smile genuine and warm. I'm Thomas Wilson. I've been the doctor in these parts for 30 years, though Margaret here taught me most of what I know about bringing babies into the world. Amanda glanced at Margaret, whose cheeks had colored slightly at the doctor's words. There was history there, a connection that went beyond professional courtesy. Dr. Wilson's examination was thorough but gentle, his hands confident as he checked Amanda's blood pressure, listened to the baby's heartbeat, and palpated her abdomen to determine the baby's position. Everything looks good, he told Amanda after the examination. Baby's growing well, heartbeat is strong. You're taking good care of yourself. He paused, looking at Margaret, or rather, Margaret's taking good care of you. Amanda nodded. She saved my life, Doctor. Wilson's gaze moved between the two women, and Amanda could see him piecing together a story he wouldn't voice aloud. Small towns had their own codes of discretion, their own ways of protecting people who needed protection. Margaret has always been good at taking care of people, he said simply. You're in excellent hands. Before leaving, Dr. Wilson pulled Margaret onto the porch for a private conversation. Amanda couldn't hear their words, but she could see their profiles through the window. Dr. Wilson speaking earnestly, Margaret listening with her arms crossed defensively across her chest, then slowly nodding in what appeared to be reluctant agreement. When Margaret returned inside, her expression was carefully neutral, but Amanda could sense an undercurrent of tension. "Is everything okay?" Amanda asked. "Thomas thinks we should tell Joseph about you being here," Margaret said, busying herself with straightening the already neat stack of magazines on the coffee table. "Says we might need help if the weather gets worse or if there's an emergency." "Who's Joseph?" "Joseph Miller. Runs the general store in town. He and Robert served together in Vietnam. He's been looking out for me since Robert died." Margaret's hands stilled. "He's a good man, but telling him means more people will know you're here." Amanda understood the implication. Every person who knew about her presence was another potential source of judgment, another echo of what had happened with Rebecca. "Do you trust him?" Amanda asked. Margaret's answer was immediate. "With my life." "Then we should tell him." The next day brought another visitor. Joseph Miller arrived in a battered pickup truck loaded with supplies. Extra firewood, groceries, and a large box that looked heavy enough to require significant strength to carry. Joseph himself was a lean, weathered man in his late 60s, with a full white beard and alert blue eyes that missed nothing. He moved with the economy of someone who had spent a lifetime doing physical work. "Margaret Stevens, you look good for someone everyone in town is talking about," Joseph said as he carried the box into the cabin. His voice was gruff, but his eyes were kind, crinkling at the corners when he smiled. "Let them talk," Margaret replied, though Amanda could hear the slight strain beneath her casual tone. "Joseph, this is Amanda Lewis. She's staying with me for a while." Joseph set down the box and extended a hand to Amanda. His grip was firm but careful, as if he was conscious of his strength. "Pleasure to meet you, Miss Lewis. Any friend of Margaret's is a friend of mine." There was an unspoken question in his eyes, but unlike the curiosity Amanda had seen in Dr. Wilson's expression, Joseph's gaze held no judgment, only concern. "Joseph brought us some supplies," Margaret explained to Amanda, "and apparently news from town." Joseph's expression grew more serious. "Pastor Richard called a special meeting at the church last night, said he was concerned about your situation up here." He made air quotes around the word situation, his disapproval of the pastor's interference evident. "Eliza Matthews is stirring up folks saying history is repeating itself." Margaret's face tightened. Eliza has always enjoyed other people's troubles more than her own happiness. "Who's Eliza Matthews?" Amanda asked. "Runs the tavern in town," Joseph explained. "Her father was on the school board back when—" He trailed off, glancing uncertainly at Margaret. "Back when we sent Rebecca away." Margaret finished for him, her voice steady despite the pain in her eyes. "Harold Matthews was the one who suggested it, said it would be a bad influence on the other girls if Rebecca stayed in school while pregnant." Joseph nodded solemnly. "Apple didn't fall far from that tree. Eliza's got half the town convinced you've got some kind of, I don't know, home for wayward girls starting up here." "And the other half?" Margaret asked. Joseph's smile returned, though it carried an edge of grimness. "The other half remembers how many of their babies you brought into this world safely. How many of their mothers and sisters you cared for when no one else would. They're not so quick to listen to Eliza or Pastor Richard." Margaret seemed to take some comfort in this, her shoulders relaxing slightly. "And you, Joseph, where do you stand?" Joseph looked genuinely surprised by the question. "Marge, I've known you for 50 years. I was there when Robert built this place. I was there when—" He stopped, swallowed hard, then continued more softly. "I was there when you buried Rebecca. You don't need to ask where I stand." The simple declaration seemed to ease something in Margaret. She nodded once, then motioned toward the box Joseph had brought. "What's in there?" Joseph's mood lightened visibly. "Some things I thought might be useful. Baby things, mostly. Clara's granddaughter just outgrew them." Clara, Amanda would later learn, was Joseph's late wife who had died of cancer 5 years earlier. Inside the box were practical items: a modern car seat, a baby bathtub, packages of diapers, and several sleepers in neutral colors. Beneath these, wrapped carefully in tissue paper, was a small patchwork quilt. "Clara made this for our daughter," Joseph explained, his voice softening as he ran his hand over the quilt. "Thought it might keep another little one warm now." Margaret touched the quilt with reverent fingers, understanding the magnitude of Joseph's gift. "Joseph, are you sure?" "Clara would have wanted it used, not sitting in a box in my attic," he said simply. Amanda watched the exchange with growing awareness that she had stumbled into a community of people whose connections ran deeper than she had initially understood. These weren't just neighbors or acquaintances. These were people who had shared joys and sorrows, who had held each other up through unimaginable grief, who understood that some gifts carried meanings beyond their material value. Later that evening, after Joseph had left with promises to return in a few days, the phone rang again. Margaret answered with her usual calm demeanor, but Amanda could see tension creeping into her posture as she listened to whoever was speaking. "I appreciate your concern, Pastor Richard," Margaret said finally, her voice cooling several degrees. "But I'm perfectly capable of making my own decisions about who stays in my home." Amanda could hear the rumble of a male voice through the phone, though she couldn't make out the words. Whatever he was saying, it was clear he disapproved of the current situation. "No, I don't think it would be appropriate for you to come by and assess the situation," Margaret continued, her voice growing firmer. "Amanda is not a problem that needs solving. She's a young woman who needs support, and I'm providing it." The conversation continued for several more minutes, with Margaret maintaining her polite but immovable position. When she finally hung up, she looked tired in a way Amanda hadn't seen before. "Some people," Margaret said with a sigh, "think kindness should come with conditions attached." That night, Amanda woke to sharp pain radiating across her lower back and abdomen. At first, she tried to convince herself it was normal pregnancy discomfort, the kind of ache that came from carrying extra weight and sleeping in unfamiliar positions. But as she shifted in bed, trying to find relief, the pain intensified with a suddenness that made her gasp. "Margaret," she called out, her voice tight with fear and pain. "Something's wrong." Margaret appeared in the doorway within seconds, fully alert despite being awakened from deep sleep. She moved with swift efficiency, turning on the bedside lamp and sitting on the edge of Amanda's bed. "Tell me what you're feeling," she said, her voice calm but authoritative. "Pain, sharp pain across my back and stomach. And I think I might be bleeding." Margaret's face remained composed, but Amanda could see the quick calculation happening behind her eyes. At 34 weeks, the baby was developed enough to survive outside the womb, but every additional week in utero was crucial for healthy development. "We need to get you to the hospital," Margaret said, already moving toward the closet to retrieve warm clothes. "Right now." The drive down the mountain in the middle of a February snowstorm was the longest 30 minutes of Amanda's life. Margaret drove with steady hands and complete focus, her old truck navigating the winding roads with practiced ease despite the slick conditions. Between contractions, Amanda found herself studying Margaret's profile, marveling at the transformation from gentle companion to competent medical professional. "How do you know what to do?" Amanda asked through gritted teeth as another wave of pain swept over her. "Some knowledge never leaves you," Margaret replied, her voice steady and reassuring. "I was a nurse for 15 years before I became a mother. Emergency situations have their own rhythm, their own requirements." At the hospital, Dr. Wilson was already waiting, alerted by Margaret's call from the road. He took one look at Amanda's condition and immediately ordered tests and monitoring. Margaret stayed by her side throughout the examination, translating medical terminology and offering quiet reassurance when the doctor spoke in the clipped, efficient language of people managing a crisis. "The good news, Dr. Baum," Wilson explained after reviewing the test results, "is that the baby appears to be healthy and the bleeding has stopped. The bad news is that you're showing signs of preterm labor and we need to take measures to slow it down." Amanda felt her world tilt slightly. "What does that mean?" "Complete bed rest for the remainder of your pregnancy, no physical activity beyond absolutely necessary movement, and close monitoring to make sure we catch any changes immediately." Margaret squeezed Amanda's hand gently. "We can manage that." Dr. Wilson looked between the two women with the careful attention of someone trying to assess a complex situation. "Mrs. Lewis will need constant supervision, someone who can recognize warning signs and respond appropriately if her condition changes." "I'll be staying with her," Margaret said simply. "I have medical training and I understand what to watch for." "Mrs. Stevens," Dr. Wilson said carefully, "that's a significant responsibility. Are you sure you're prepared for what that might involve? Margaret's answer came without hesitation. Doctor, I've been preparing for this responsibility my entire life. They returned to the cabin with a bag full of medications and detailed instructions for managing a high-risk pregnancy. Margaret transformed the living room into a comfortable space where Amanda could rest while remaining part of the household's daily activities. She moved the television closer to the sofa, arranged books and magazines within easy reach, and positioned the knitting basket so Amanda could continue working on baby projects without straining. Most importantly, Margaret retrieved a small leather bag from the storage room, its contents clearly organized and well-maintained despite years of disuse. Inside were medical instruments, blood pressure, cuff, stethoscope, and other tools that spoke of professional competence and careful preparation. You kept your medical supplies, Amanda observed as Margaret checked her blood pressure with practiced efficiency. A nurse never really stops being a nurse, Margaret replied, recording the readings in a notebook she had designated for tracking Amanda's condition. The knowledge becomes part of who you are, even when you're not actively using it. Over the following days, Amanda began to understand the depth of Margaret's medical background. She checked vital signs with the precision of someone who had done it thousands of times, recognized subtle changes in symptoms before Amanda was even aware of them, and maintained detailed records that would have impressed any hospital staff. "Why did you stop?" Amanda asked one afternoon as Margaret prepared medications with careful attention to timing and dosage. "You're clearly gifted at this." Margaret paused in her preparations, her hands still for a moment. "After Rebecca died, I couldn't bear to help other people's babies come into the world safely when I had failed my own daughter so completely." "But you didn't fail her medically." "No, but I failed her in other ways that mattered more." Margaret's voice carried the weight of old grief and newer understanding. Sometimes the most important healing isn't physical. Sometimes it's emotional, spiritual. Sometimes it's about creating space for someone to become who they're meant to be. Amanda reached for Margaret's hand, squeezing it gently. "You're giving me that space now." "Yes," Margaret replied, her voice soft but certain. "And this time I'm going to get it right." While Margaret was outside splitting firewood, Amanda found herself restless despite the strict bed rest orders. Her eyes wandered around the living room, taking in details she had never noticed during her months of recovery and preparation. High on a bookshelf, partially hidden behind a collection of gardening manuals, she spotted the corner of what looked like a diploma or certificate. Curiosity overcoming caution, Amanda carefully maneuvered herself off the sofa and reached for the frame. What she discovered made her sink back onto the cushions in amazement. Margaret Elizabeth Stevens, Certified Nurse Midwife, State of Colorado, 1967. Below the official certification were several other documents, advanced training certificates in emergency obstetrics, neonatal care, and high-risk pregnancy management, letters of commendation from hospital administrators, a photograph of a young Margaret in a crisp white uniform, standing with a group of other medical professionals outside what appeared to be a maternity ward. Amanda was still staring at the documents when Margaret returned, stamping snow off her boots and unwrapping the thick scarf that protected her from the mountain cold. "You weren't supposed to be moving around," Margaret said gently, but her tone carried more concern than reproach. "Margaret," Amanda said, holding up the certificate with trembling hands, "you were a midwife." Margaret's expression shifted, moving through surprise, resignation, and finally a kind of relief. She hung up her coat with deliberate care before settling into her rocking chair. Her movements suggested someone who had been carrying a weight and was finally ready to set it down. "For 15 years, Margaret confirmed quietly, before Rebecca was born and for a few years after." "But you told me you were a nurse. You never mentioned that you specialized in delivering babies." Margaret looked out the window at the snow-covered pines, her fingers absently working the edge of her sweater. "After what happened to Rebecca, I couldn't bear to continue. How could I help other women safely deliver their babies when I had failed my own daughter so completely?" Amanda studied the photograph more closely, seeing in young Margaret's face the same gentle confidence she had come to depend on, but also something else: joy, purpose, the unmistakable expression of someone who had found their calling in life. "How many babies did you deliver?" Amanda asked softly. 237. The number came without hesitation, as if Margaret had kept count of each precious life she had helped bring into the world. From premature twins who weighed less than 3 pounds each to a 10-pound boy whose mother was convinced he would never arrive. And you just stopped after Rebecca, Margaret's hand stilled in her lap. I delivered one more baby after Rebecca died, a little girl whose mother had complications similar to Rebecca's. When I managed to save both of them, I broke down completely in the delivery room. I realized I couldn't trust myself anymore. Every delivery would remind me of my failure. Amanda felt pieces of a complex puzzle falling into place. Margaret's immediate knowledge of pregnancy symptoms, her calm competence during the emergency, her well-maintained medical supplies, her detailed understanding of what Amanda's body was experiencing. Margaret, you didn't fail Rebecca medically. Dr. Wilson told me that hemorrhaging during childbirth was much more dangerous 40 years ago. The medical technology, the blood banking, the emergency procedures, they weren't what they are now. I know that intellectually, Margaret replied, but knowledge and feelings don't always align. I spent 43 years believing that if I had been a better midwife, a more attentive mother, somehow I could have prevented what happened. Amanda carefully moved from the sofa to sit on the floor beside Margaret's chair, the same position that had become their customary arrangement during evening conversations. What changed? What made you willing to help me? Margaret's hand found Amanda's hair, stroking it with a tender gesture that had become as natural as breathing. You did. The night I found you in the snow, my instincts took over before my fears could stop me. For the first time in 4 decades, I acted like the midwife I used to be instead of the woman haunted by tragedy. And it felt right. It felt like coming home to myself. Margaret's voice grew stronger, more certain. Taking care of you, preparing for this baby's arrival. It's reminded me that my calling wasn't something I lost. It was something I abandoned out of fear. Amanda looked again at the certificate, at the evidence of Margaret's expertise and dedication. Will you deliver my baby? The question hung in the air between them, loaded with significance that went far beyond practical considerations. Amanda was asking Margaret to return fully to her abandoned identity, to trust her skills and judgment in the most crucial moment possible. Are you sure? Margaret asked, her voice barely above a whisper. The hospital has all the modern equipment, all the safety measures. I'm sure you're the person I trust most in the world. You're the one who's been taking care of us all along. Amanda squeezed Margaret's hand gently. Besides, if something goes wrong, we're only 30 minutes from the hospital. But I have a feeling everything is going to be exactly as it should be. Margaret's eyes filled with tears, but for the first time since Amanda had known her, they seemed to be tears of healing rather than grief. The telephone's shrill ring broke the moment. Margaret crossed the room to answer it, her hello warm and welcoming, until she heard the voice on the other end. Her posture stiffened immediately. Pastor Richard, I've already told you. She fell silent, listening. Amanda could see Margaret's knuckles whitening as she gripped the receiver. I understand your concern, Margaret said, finally, her voice tight with controlled anger. But neither Amanda nor I will be attending at a meeting at the church to discuss our situation. This is my home, she is my guest, and that's all anyone in town needs to know. Another pause as she listened. No, I don't believe that's necessary. And frankly, if the church community has nothing better to worry about than an old woman helping a pregnant girl, perhaps you should be leading them toward more Christian pursuits. Margaret hung up the phone with deliberate care, as if resisting the urge to slam it down. Her breathing was measured, controlled, but Amanda could see she was shaking slightly. What was that about? Amanda asked, though she had a good idea. Pastor Richard thinks it would be healing for the community if we came to a special meeting to discuss what happened with Rebecca and what's happening now with you, as if our lives are some kind of object lesson for the town's entertainment. Margaret's voice trembled with barely contained fury. He wasn't here, then, was he? Amanda asked. He wasn't the pastor when Rebecca... No, he came 10 years ago, but he's heard all the stories. Thinks he understands what happened, what we went through. Margaret sank back into her rocking chair, suddenly looking every one of her 73 years. Nobody understands, not really. They just see what they want to see, sir. What do they see when they look at you? Margaret's smile was sure and knowing. They see a cautionary tale. The proud woman who sent her pregnant daughter away to protect her reputation only to lose her completely. The midwife who delivered hundreds of babies safely but couldn't save her own grandchild from becoming an orphan. That's not who you are, Amanda said fiercely. That's not what I see. What do you see? Margaret asked, genuine curiosity in her voice. I see someone brave enough to face her deepest fears to help a stranger. I see someone who keeps baby clothes for 40 years because she never stopped hoping they'd be needed again. I see someone who remembers every single baby she delivered, who keeps her medical supplies ready even when she thinks she'll never use them. Amanda struggled to rise from her position on the floor, her pregnant belly making it awkward. Margaret immediately moved to help her, supporting her with strong arm until Amanda was steady on her feet. Most of all, Amanda continued looking directly into Margaret's eyes. I see the person I want to become, someone who doesn't let fear or judgment stop her from doing what's right. Before Margaret could respond, Amanda gasped suddenly, her hand flying to her stomach as pain lanced through her. Amanda, Margaret's voice sharpened with concern. What is it? The baby. I think I'm having contractions. Real ones this time. Margaret's transformation was immediate and complete. The uncertain, vulnerable woman of moments before disappeared, replaced by the confident medical professional Amanda had glimpsed during their trip to the hospital. She guided Amanda to the sofa, her movements precise and purposeful. How far apart are they? When did they start? I'm not sure. I've been feeling twinges all day, but I thought it was just false labor again. Another contraction hit stronger this time. Amanda gripped Margaret's hand, her breath coming in sharp gasps. Maybe 15 minutes apart. This one is worse, though. Margaret checked her watch, noting the time. I'm going to examine you, and then we'll decide whether to head to the hospital or call Dr. Wilson. With calm efficiency, Margaret gathered her supplies and performed a quick examination. Her face remained neutral, but Amanda saw concern flash in her eyes. You're already 4 centimeters dilated, Margaret said. This baby isn't waiting. With the snow that started an hour ago, I don't think we should risk the drive. So what do we do? Amanda asked, fear evident in her voice. Margaret's answer was steady, her gaze unflinching as she met Amanda's eyes. We deliver this baby right here, right now, together. Margaret moved with practiced precision, transforming the living room into a makeshift delivery room within minutes. She spread clean sheets over the sofa, gathered towels, prepared warm water, and laid out her medical instruments with the fluid efficiency of someone performing a long memorized dance. Her hands, which had knitted and cooked with unhurried patience over the past weeks, now executed each task with swift, decisive movements. I'm scared, Amanda whispered between contractions, her eyes wide with a fear that went beyond the normal anxiety of childbirth. It's too early. What if something's wrong? Margaret's face remained calm, but her eyes held a fierce determination that Amanda found strangely reassuring. 34 weeks is early, but not dangerously so. The baby's lungs should be developed enough. And you're not alone. You've got a certified midwife with 237 deliveries under her belt. Amanda clung to those words as another contraction gripped her stronger than before. The pain radiated from her lower back, wrapping around her abdomen like a vice. Margaret checked her watch, timing the contraction with unwavering focus. 8 minutes apart now, moving faster than I expected. Margaret reached for the phone. I'm calling Thomas. I want him on standby at the hospital in case we need him. The conversation with Dr. Wilson was brief and professional, 2 medical experts discussing a case with the shorthand terminology of their shared profession. When Margaret hung up, her expression had shifted subtly, more determined, more focused. Thomas is snowed in at the clinic. The roads to the hospital are completely blocked. She squeezed Amanda's hand, her touch conveying strength rather than fear. But he'll be on the phone with us the whole time. We're not alone in this. Outside, the snow fell with increasing intensity, fat flakes swirling in the yellow glow of the porch light. The wind howled against the cabin walls as if nature itself was conspiring to isolate them in this moment of crisis. Yet within the cabin, Margaret created an atmosphere of calm competence that seemed to hold the storm at bay. The phone rang again as Margaret was checking Amanda's vital signs. She answered with one hand while maintaining contact with Amanda with the other. Her expression darkened as she listened to the caller. Joseph, I need you to listen carefully. Margaret said, her voice taking on an urgency that made Amanda's heart race. Amanda's in labor and we're cut off by the snow. I need you to try to get Dr. Wilson here if possible, but if the roads are too dangerous, I need supplies. She rattled off a list of items with the precision of someone who knew exactly what might be required in an emergency delivery. Joseph's response must have been affirmative because Margaret's shoulders relaxed slightly. And Joseph, if you see Pastor Richard or anyone else from town, not a word about this. The last thing we need is an audience. As the hours passed, Amanda's labor intensified. Each contraction brought her closer to delivery, but also increased Margaret's concern about the baby's early arrival. She monitored Amanda's blood pressure religiously, checked the baby's position with skilled hands, and maintained a calm demeanor that belied the gravity of their situation. "You're doing beautifully," Margaret assured Amanda during a brief respite between contractions. "The baby's head is engaged perfectly. Everything is progressing just as it should." Amanda nodded weakly, exhaustion beginning to take its toll. "Have you ever delivered a baby alone before, without doctors or nurses?" A shadow crossed Margaret's face there and gone so quickly, Amanda might have imagined opposite. 23 times, mostly in homes where that was the plan, sometimes in situations like this where weather or circumstances made hospital delivery impossible. Amanda wanted to ask about those deliveries, wanted the reassurance of hearing success stories, but another contraction seized her before she could form the words. This one was different, deeper, more insistent, accompanied by an overwhelming urge to push. "Margaret, I think I need to push." Margaret checked Amanda quickly, then nodded. "You're fully dilated. It's time to bring this baby into the world." Outside, the sound of an engine struggling through snow announced Joseph's arrival. Margaret's relief was palpable as she glanced toward the window. "Perfect timing. Let's get you ready to push," while Joseph brings in the supplies. The cabin door opened, bringing a blast of cold air, and the imposing figure of Joseph Miller, his arms laden with packages, snow covering his beard and coat. He took in the scene with a single glance, immediately understanding the situation. "Got everything you asked for, plus Thomas sent some emergency equipment from the clinic." He placed the packages on the kitchen table, careful not to look directly at Amanda in her vulnerable position. "What else can I do?" Margaret directed him to boil water and sterilize some of the equipment Thomas had sent. Joseph moved with surprising grace for a man his size, following Margaret's instructions without question or hesitation. His presence added a sense of security, an extra pair of hands, if things went wrong. "Joseph was a medic in Vietnam," Margaret explained to Amanda between contractions. "He knows what to do in an emergency." Another contraction hit stronger than any before. Amanda gripped Margaret's hand with crushing force, a guttural sound escaping her throat as the urge to push became overwhelming. "Now, Amanda, push with the contraction." Margaret's voice was steady, authoritative. "That's it. You're doing wonderfully." With each contraction, Amanda pushed, following Margaret's guidance. The pain was beyond anything she had imagined, but Margaret's voice anchored her, providing a focal point in the storm of sensation. "I can see the head," Margaret announced, excitement coloring her professional tone. "Dark hair just like yours. One more big push with the next contraction." Amanda summoned her remaining strength, bearing down with the next wave of pain. There was a moment of burning pressure, then a sudden release as the baby's head emerged. Margaret worked quickly, checking for the umbilical cord around the neck, supporting the tiny head with practiced hands. "Shoulders coming now. Almost there, Amanda. One more push." With a final tremendous effort, Amanda felt the baby slip from her body into Margaret's waiting hands. For one heart-stopping moment, there was silence. Then a thin cry filled the cabin, indignant, alive, perfect. "It's a girl," Margaret announced, her voice thick with emotion as she laid the tiny infant on Amanda's chest. "A beautiful, perfect little girl." The baby was smaller than Amanda had expected, but clearly healthy, with a full head of dark hair and skin that gradually turned pink as she continued to cry. Margaret worked efficiently, clearing the baby's airways, checking vital signs, and cutting the umbilical cord with Joseph's assistance. 10 fingers, 10 toes, strong lungs, Margaret reported as she wrapped the newborn in one of the soft blankets they had prepared. "She's absolutely perfect." Joseph, standing at a respectful distance, removed his hat and held it over his heart. "A miracle," he whispered, his weathered face soft with wonder. "A genuine miracle." As Amanda cradled her daughter, the reality of what they had accomplished together began to sink in. Against all odds, the premature labor, the snowstorm, the isolation, they had safely brought a new life into the world. And Margaret, who had carried the weight of her perceived failure for 43 years, had reclaimed her identity as a healer and midwife in the most profound way possible. "What will you name her?" Joseph asked softly. Amanda looked down at her daughter's face, then up at Margaret, whose eyes shone with unshed tears. "Hannah," she said without hesitation. "Her name is Hannah." The name hung in the air between them, its significance not lost on Margaret. Hannah, so similar to Hope, the name Rebecca had chosen for her own daughter. A bridge between past and present, a second chance manifested in 7 pounds of new life. Margaret's hands, which had moved with such confident precision throughout the delivery, trembled slightly as she reached out to touch Hannah's cheek. "It's a beautiful name," she whispered. "A perfect name." In the hours that followed, Joseph maintained a protective presence, stoking the fire, preparing food, and keeping watch over the small family as they rested. He made several trips to his truck, bringing in additional supplies and a satellite phone Dr. Wilson had sent in case the landlines went down in the storm. Margaret remained vigilant, checking both Amanda and Hannah, regularly monitoring for any signs of complications. But as the night deepened and both mother and daughter continued to thrive, the tension gradually eased from her shoulders. "You should rest," Joseph told Margaret as she completed yet another check of Amanda's vital signs. "I'll keep watch for a while." Margaret shook her head, though exhaustion was evident in the lines of her face. "I need to monitor them for at least 24 hours. Premature births can have delayed complications." Joseph's expression softened with understanding. "You're not going to lose them, Margaret. Not like Rebecca. This story has a different ending." Margaret looked up sharply, surprised by his directness. But instead of the pain Joseph might have expected, her eyes reflected something closer to peace. "I know," she said quietly, "but I still need to watch over them." Joseph nodded, respecting her need to complete this journey in her own way. "Then I'll watch over you while you watch over them." True to his word, Joseph maintained his vigil throughout the night, a silent guardian, ensuring that Margaret could focus entirely on her patients. By morning, when the storm finally began to abate, Dr. Wilson was able to make his way to the cabin, trudging the final half-mile on foot after his vehicle could go no further. His examination of both Amanda and Hannah was thorough, but revealed what Margaret already knew. Mother and daughter were doing remarkably well despite the circumstances of the birth. Hannah's lungs were functioning properly, her reflexes were strong, and her temperature was stable. "You haven't lost your touch, Margaret," Dr. Wilson said, genuine admiration in his voice as he packed away his stethoscope. "This is textbook perfect care, especially given the constraints you were working under." Margaret accepted the compliment with quiet dignity, though Amanda noticed a new light in her eyes, a confidence that hadn't been there before. In successfully delivering Hannah, Margaret had not only helped bring a new life into the world, but had also begun to heal the wound that had shaped her existence for over 4 decades. As the days passed and Hannah continued to thrive, life in the cabin settled into a new rhythm centered around the needs of the newborn. Margaret's natural affinity for baby care became evident in countless small ways: the perfect swaddling technique that kept Hannah feeling secure, the gentle massage that eased her digestive discomfort, the soft humming that soothed her during fussy periods. "How do you know all this?" Amanda asked one evening as she watched Margaret expertly bathe Hannah in a small basin, supporting the baby's head with one hand while washing her with the other. Margaret smiled, her movements never faltering. "Some of it is training, most of it is experience. But the truth is, babies haven't changed much in the last few thousand years. Their needs are simple: warmth, food, cleanliness, love. Everything else is just details." Joseph continued to visit daily, bringing supplies and news from town. The story of Hannah's birth had spread, creating ripples of reaction throughout the community. Some, led by Pastor Richard and Eliza Matthews, viewed it as confirmation of their suspicions. History repeating itself, Margaret once again involved with an unwed mother and an unplanned baby. Others, particularly those who remembered Margaret's years as a midwife, saw it differently. A redemptive full circle, Margaret using her gifts to ensure this young mother and child had the outcome that Rebecca and Hope had been denied. "Town's divided," Joseph reported one afternoon as he stacked firewood by the hearth. "Pastor Richard's still pushing for some kind of intervention, though he's vague about what exactly that would entail. Eliza's crowd is eating it up, treating the whole situation like some kind of soap opera." Margaret's response was measured, untroubled. "And the others?" Joseph's weathered face creased in a smile. The others are organizing. Clara's quilting circle is making baby things. The veterans group I meet with has offered to help with any repairs or improvements the cabin might need before spring. And Thomas has been quite vocal about the exceptional medical care you provided under emergency conditions. The support from the community was unexpected, but deeply touching. In the days that followed, gifts began to arrive: hand-knitted booties, homemade baby blankets, casseroles, and practical items for a newborn. Each delivery came with a note or card, many from families whose children or grandchildren Margaret had delivered during her years as a midwife. "They remember," Margaret said softly one evening as she sorted through the latest batch of gifts. "All these years I thought they only remembered my failure, but they remember the good things too." The gradual shift in community perception coincided with an equally significant change in Margaret herself. The woman who had lived in self-imposed isolation, haunted by her past, began to emerge from that shadow. She laughed more easily, spoke more openly about Rebecca, and allowed herself to fully embrace her role in Hannah's life. Amanda watched this transformation with a mix of joy and apprehension. The deeper Margaret's bond with Hannah grew, the more Amanda worried about the inevitable moment when she would have to take her daughter and forge their own path. The thought of leaving the safety and warmth of Margaret's cabin, of removing Hannah from the only other person who had loved her from her first breath, created an ache that Amanda couldn't fully articulate. One snowy afternoon, as Hannah slept peacefully in the wooden cradle Robert had crafted so many years ago, Margaret brought out a wooden box Amanda had never seen before. Unlike the cedar chest where the baby clothes had been stored, this box was small and plainly made its surface worn smooth by frequent handling. "These are from Hope," Margaret explained, opening the box to reveal a collection of letters, cards, and small items. "She found me when she turned 18. The adoption agency had my information sealed, but she was persistent." Amanda looked through the contents with care. Birthday cards, Christmas letters, school photographs showing a girl growing into a woman who bore a striking resemblance to Rebecca. The most recent photo showed Hope with her husband and 3 children standing in front of a school where, according to the accompanying letter, she taught 4th grade. "She calls me Grandmother Margaret," Margaret said, a note of wonder still present in her voice after all these years. "We write regularly, talk on the phone sometimes. She visits when she can, though it's not easy with 3 kids and a full-time job." Amanda studied the most recent photograph more closely, noting the confident smile, the direct gaze, so reminiscent of Margaret herself. "Does she know about the circumstances of her birth, I mean?" Margaret nodded, carefully replacing the items in the box. "She knows everything. I promised myself I would never lie to her, never hide the truth the way we hid Rebecca's pregnancy." It was hard at first. She was angry, confused. But eventually she came to understand that people can make terrible mistakes for what they believe are good reasons. The revelation of this long-maintained connection with her granddaughter added another dimension to Amanda's understanding of Margaret. The woman who had seemed so isolated, so defined by loss, had actually been nurturing this precious relationship for decades. It wasn't the same as having Rebecca in her life, but it was a thread of continuity, a link to the daughter she had lost. "Why didn't you tell me about her sooner?" Amanda asked, genuinely curious rather than accusatory. Margaret's answer was thoughtful, considered. "Some wounds heal from the inside out. I needed to make peace with my role in your life before I could share how I've tried to make amends in hopes." The days stretched into weeks as winter maintained its grip on the mountain. Hannah grew stronger, putting on weight and developing the alert awareness that delighted both women. Amanda's body healed, and she began to think about the future with increasing urgency. Her savings were minimal, her job prospects limited by her lack of higher education, and her support network non-existent outside of Margaret and the small community that had gathered around them. One evening, as they sat by the fire with Hannah sleeping contentedly between them, Margaret broached the subject that had been weighing on Amanda's mind. "What are your plans when spring comes?" Margaret's tone was casual, but Amanda could hear the carefully controlled emotion beneath the question. Amanda stared into the flames, searching for an answer that wouldn't sound as desperate as she felt. "I don't really have plans or options. I'll need to find work somewhere to live. I have a high school diploma and 2 years of community college, but no degree. Not much to build a life on." "You could stay." Margaret spoke the words quietly, almost as if she hadn't meant to say them aloud. "Here, I mean, with me." The offer hung in the air between them, monumental in its simplicity. Amanda looked at Margaret, searching her face for signs of reluctance or obligation, but found only genuine hope. Margaret, I can't impose on you indefinitely. You've already done so much. It's not an imposition, Margaret interrupted, her voice stronger now. This cabin has 3 bedrooms. There's plenty of space. And She paused, seeming to search for the right words. I've been alone a very long time. Having you and Hannah here has reminded me what it's like to have purpose, to be needed. Amanda felt tears prick her eyes, overwhelmed by the generosity of the offer. But what about when you want your life back? Your privacy? Margaret's laugh was gentle but had an edge of sadness. My life for the past 43 years has been an exercise in having too much privacy, too much space with my regrets. I'm offering because I want you both here, not out of obligation or pity. Later that night, unable to sleep, despite her exhaustion, Amanda wandered the cabin quietly. Hannah cradled against her chest. The baby had been fussy, uncomfortable with gas, and Amanda had found that gentle movement helped soothe her. As she paced, she studied the cabin with new eyes, not as a temporary shelter, but as a potential home. The craftsmanship was evident everywhere she looked. Robert's handiwork was present in every piece of furniture, every carefully fitted joint and polished surface. Margaret's touch was equally visible in the quilts, the organized kitchen, the general sense of thoughtful care that permeated the space. This wasn't just a house, it was a home, created by people who had loved each other, who had poured their hearts into building something that would last. Amanda paused at the bookshelf where she had discovered Margaret's midwife certification. Next to it now stood a framed photograph Joseph had taken the day after Hannah's birth, Amanda holding her newborn daughter with Margaret seated beside them, her face alight with a joy that erased decades of sorrow. The 3 of them connected by circumstance but united by something deeper, something that felt remarkably like family. The realization struck Amanda with unexpected force. She wanted this. Wanted to stay in this cabin with its history and warmth. Wanted Hannah to grow up knowing the woman who had helped bring her into the world. Wanted to build a future in this place where past wounds were finally beginning to heal. Hannah stirred against her chest, making the small grunting sounds that preceded crying. Amanda shifted her position, patting the baby's back gently until she settled again. As she moved, her gaze fell on something she hadn't noticed before, a small locked door beneath the stairs, its surface dust-free, but its hinges showing no signs of recent use. Curiosity piqued Amanda, made a mental note to ask Margaret about it in the morning. This cabin held so many stories, so many layers of history. If they were going to make it their home, Amanda wanted to understand every corner, every hidden space. When morning came, bringing with it a rare break in the winter weather, Joseph arrived with more supplies and unexpected news. His usually calm demeanor was disrupted, tension evident in the set of his shoulders and the furrow of his brow. Pastor Richard and Eliza Matthews are organizing a formal visit, he announced without preamble as he set down his packages. They're calling it a wellness check, claiming concern for Amanda and the baby. They've convinced one of the county social workers to come along, make it official. Margaret's reaction was immediate and fierce. They have no right. This is private property, and Amanda and Hannah are under my care. Joseph held up a placating hand. I know, Marge. That's why I'm warning you. They're coming tomorrow, weather permitting. Thomas is trying to head them off, arguing that as Hannah's doctor, he's already monitoring her welfare. But Eliza's brother-in-law is on the county board, and he's pushing for this. The implications of this wellness check hung heavily in the air. For all the progress Margaret had made in reclaiming her identity and healing her past wounds, the specter of community judgment, the same judgment that had influenced her fateful decision about Rebecca, was rising again. What do they want? Amanda asked instinctively, holding Hannah closer. What are they hoping to find? Joseph's expression was grim. Hard to say exactly. Pastor Richard is new enough that he doesn't fully understand the history. I think he genuinely believes he's offering help, though his idea of help might not align with what you need. Eliza, he hesitated, choosing his words carefully. Eliza has her own reasons. Her father was instrumental in the decision to send Rebecca away. Maybe she's trying to justify that, prove it was the right call by showing that history is repeating. Margaret's face had gone pale, but her voice remained steady. It's not the same situation. I'm not hiding Amanda or Hannah. I'm not ashamed of them or trying to protect my reputation. We know that, Joseph assured her, but perception matters in a town this small. How people interpret what's happening here will affect all of you. As Joseph left, promising to return the next day before the official visit, Margaret moved through the cabin with restless energy, straightening things that were already tidy, checking and rechecking, Hannah with an intensity that betrayed her anxiety. "Margaret," Amanda said gently, catching the older woman's hand as she passed, "we don't have to do this. Hannah and I could go to avoid causing you more trouble with the town." Margaret stilled, looking down at their joined hands. When she raised her eyes to meet Amanda's, they held a clarity and resolve that hadn't been there before. Running away is what caused the tragedy with Rebecca, caring more about what people thought than what she needed. "I won't make that mistake again, not with you and Hannah." Her grip on Amanda's hand tightened. "This is your home for as long as you want it to be. No social worker or small-town gossip is going to change that." The words "your home" resonated deeply with Amanda, confirming the decision she had made during her midnight wanderings. "I do want to stay," she said softly. "Not just until spring. Not just until I figure something else out. I want this to be Hannah's home, our home with you." Something shifted in Margaret's expression, a tension releasing, a fear subsiding. The lines around her eyes softened, and for a moment she looked younger, unburdened. Then it settled. We faced them together as a family. Morning light filtered through frost-covered windows as Margaret and Amanda prepared for the impending wellness check. They moved with deliberate purpose, transforming the already comfortable cabin into a showcase of preparedness and care. Fresh linens on every bed, Hannah's tiny clothes folded with military precision, medical records arranged chronologically on the kitchen table. A fortress built of domestic order and meticulous attention. "They'll be looking for reasons to interfere," Margaret explained as she inspected Hannah's sleeping area for the third time. "People always find what they're searching for, so we need to make sure all they see is a healthy baby and a stable home." Amanda nodded, understanding the stakes. This wasn't just about impression management. It was about protecting the fragile new family they were creating. "Should we hide your midwifery equipment? They might question why you delivered Hannah here instead of trying harder to reach the hospital." Margaret considered this, then shook her head firmly. "No hiding, no deception. That's what went wrong with Rebecca. Secrets and shame. We did nothing wrong. Hannah was coming, the roads were blocked, and I used my training to ensure a safe delivery. If they question that, they'll have to question Dr. Wilson too." By mid-morning, Joseph arrived as promised, accompanied by Dr. Wilson. Both men carried themselves with the protective stance of sentinels preparing for battle. Dr. Wilson brought Hannah's complete medical file with meticulous notes documenting her care from birth until his most recent examination 2 days prior. "I've highlighted the developmental milestones she's already meeting," Dr. Wilson explained, setting the file alongside Margaret's records. "Normal muscle tone, excellent reflexes, appropriate weight gain. All evidence of exemplary care, especially for a premature infant." Joseph moved to the window, watching the road with narrowed eyes. "They're coming. 3 vehicles. Pastor Richard's station wagon, Eliza's SUV, and a county car I don't recognize. Must be the social worker." Margaret straightened her shoulders, smoothed her cardigan, and moved to stand beside Amanda, who held Hannah against her chest. The physical positioning was deliberate, a united front, 3 generations connected by choice rather than blood. "Remember," Margaret said quietly as footsteps approached the porch, "we have nothing to hide and nothing to apologize for." The knock, when it came, was authoritative. 3 sharp raps that seemed to demand rather than request entry. Margaret opened the door with the composed dignity of a woman who had faced far worse than small-town scrutiny. Pastor Richard stood at the front of the small delegation. Despite his position as the moral leader of the community, his demeanor radiated discomfort, suggesting this confrontation wasn't entirely his idea. Behind him stood Eliza Matthews, immaculately dressed in a cashmere sweater in pearls that seemed excessive for a mountain visit, her expression a mixture of curiosity and something harder to define. The third visitor, a woman in her 40s with a leather portfolio and practical boots, carried herself with the professional neutrality of someone accustomed to difficult home visits. "Mrs. Stevens," Pastor Richard began, his voice artificially warm, "thank you for agreeing to this visit. As I mentioned, we're just concerned about—" "I didn't agree to this visit," Margaret corrected him calmly. But I'm not opposed to showing you that Amanda and Hannah are well cared for. Please come in, but keep your voices down. Hannah just fell asleep. The small group entered their presence, immediately filling the cabin with tension. Eliza's gaze swept critically across every surface, lingering on the certificates Margaret had now proudly displayed on the wall. Pastor Richard focused primarily on Amanda, his expression a practiced blend of concern and encouragement that didn't quite reach his eyes. The social worker introduced herself simply as Ms. Benson from County Services. Unlike her companions, she maintained a professional distance, observing rather than judging, taking notes on a small pad as she conducted a visual assessment of the living conditions. "What a cozy arrangement," Eliza remarked, her tone making the compliment sound like criticism. "And the baby sleeps where exactly?" Before Margaret could answer, Amanda stepped forward. "Hannah sleeps in a handcrafted cradle in my room upstairs. Margaret checks on her throughout the night since I'm still recovering from childbirth and need uninterrupted sleep when possible." Ms. Benson nodded, making another note. "And the feeding schedule? Every 2 to 3 hours," Amanda replied confidently. "I'm breastfeeding with supplemental formula as recommended by Dr. Wilson to ensure proper weight gain. Margaret keeps detailed records of each feeding and diaper change." She gestured toward the notebook on the side table open to that morning's entries. Pastor Richard cleared his throat. "Mrs. Stevens, while your hospitality is commendable, we're concerned about the long-term plans. Surely Ms. Lewis and her child need a more permanent arrangement than imposing on your retirement." The word imposing hung in the air, sharp and deliberate. Margaret's eyes narrowed slightly, but her voice remained level. "Amanda and Hannah aren't imposing. They're living here with me for as long as they choose. This is their home now." Eliza's eyebrows rose, skepticism evident in every line of her face. "Their home, Margaret, be reasonable. This cabin barely accommodated you and Robert. It's hardly suitable for a young mother starting over. I've managed quite well in this barely accommodating space for 15 years since Robert passed." Margaret replied, iron beneath the silk of her tone. "The cabin has 3 bedrooms, a functioning bathroom, and a kitchen that's fed thousands of meals to hundreds of guests over the years, including your father, Eliza, when he came to ask for my help delivering your sister because the hospital was too far and the doctor was unavailable." The reference to this past service rendered the younger woman momentarily speechless, her carefully constructed superiority crumbling at the edges. Benson, seemingly immune to the undercurrents of tension, continued her assessment with professional detachment. "Ms. Lewis, may I ask about your plans for financial stability, child support from the father, employment prospects, educational goals?" Amanda held Hannah a little closer, drawing strength from the warm weight of her daughter. "Hannah's father isn't in the picture by his choice. I have savings that will last a few more months, and I've applied for remote work positions that would allow me to earn while caring for Hannah. Long-term, I'm exploring online degree completion programs." "That sounds very optimistic," Pastor Richard interjected, his condescension thinly veiled. "But children are expensive, and good intentions don't pay bills or provide stability." Joseph, who had remained silent by the window until now, stepped forward. "Amanda's already been offered a part-time position managing the books for the veterans thrift store in town. Flexible hours, fair pay, and Hannah would be welcome there with her. We've been looking for someone with basic accounting skills for months." This announcement, news to both Amanda and Margaret, shifted the dynamic in the room. Ms. Benson made another note, nodding slightly as if a question had been answered satisfactorily. Eliza, regaining her composure, tried another angle. "It's not just about financial stability. It's about community integration support systems. Living isolated up here with only Margaret—" "Isolated?" Dr. Wilson interrupted, genuine surprise in his voice. "Margaret's cabin has had more visitors in the past month than most homes in town. The quilting circle drops by weekly. Joseph checks in daily. I'm here for regular medical visits. 3 families from the community have already offered childcare assistance once Amanda begins working." The calculated dismantling of each concern left Pastor Richard and Eliza increasingly uncomfortable. Their narrative of rescue, saving a young mother from inappropriate living conditions, was collapsing in the face of evidence that Amanda and Hannah were not only adequately cared for but genuinely thriving. Ms. Benson completed her walkthrough of the cabin, pausing to inspect the nursery area, the medical supplies, the food stores, and the general safety of the environment. Her expression remained neutral, but the thoroughness of her inspection reassured rather than alarmed. "I've seen what I need to see," she announced, finally closing her portfolio. "Based on my observation, there are no immediate concerns regarding the welfare of either Ms. Lewis or her infant daughter. The living arrangement appears stable, the caregiving appropriate, and the support system more robust than many I encounter." Pastor Richard shifted uncomfortably. "But surely the similarity to the situation with Rebecca, that's enough." Margaret's voice cut through the room like a blade sharp enough to silence everyone. "What happened with Rebecca happened because Robert and I made the worst mistake of our lives. We put appearances above our daughter's needs. We sent her away instead of standing beside her. We worried more about what people like you would think than about what our child needed." Her hands trembled slightly, but her gaze remained steady. "I've spent 43 years living with that mistake. 43 years waking up every morning knowing my daughter died, believing I was ashamed of her. I will not," her voice caught, then strengthened. "I will not stand by while you try to create the same situation for Amanda and Hannah. Not in the name of concern, not in the name of community standards, and certainly not in the name of religion." The raw emotion in Margaret's voice transformed the atmosphere in the cabin. Even Eliza seemed affected, her carefully maintained facade of concern cracking to reveal something more complex. Perhaps recognition, perhaps the ghost of empathy. Ms. Benson closed her notebook with finality. "As I said, I see no cause for concern or intervention. Ms. Lewis has adequate support. The baby is thriving and the living situation is appropriate. Unless circumstances change significantly, this case doesn't warrant further visits." The official assessment effectively ended the inspection. Pastor Richard attempted a graceful retreat, couching his concerns in vague statements about community resources being available should they be needed. Eliza maintained a dignified silence, her mission thwarted, but her pride intact. As the unwelcome visitors departed, Joseph closed the door behind them with a soft click that somehow conveyed satisfaction. That went better than expected. Margaret sank into her rocking chair, the adrenaline of confrontation leaving her system. "They'll be back. Different pretense, same agenda. People don't change their minds easily, especially when they're invested in being right." Dr. Wilson checked Hannah once more, confirming that the stressful encounter hadn't affected her. "The official report will help. County Services doesn't have the resources to pursue cases where there's no evident problem." Amanda looked at Joseph, curiosity overriding her relief. "Was that true about the bookkeeping job?" Joseph's weathered face creased in a smile that reached his eyes. "It is now. We do need help with the books, and Clara always said you should hire someone for their character first and train them for the watch second. You've got character in spades, young lady." The impromptu job offer, a perfect blend of practical help and maintained dignity, brought tears to Amanda's eyes. "Thank you, I don't know what to say." "Say you'll start after Hannah turns 3 months, Joseph replied pragmatically. "That's enough time for you to settle in and for us to set up a proper workspace where you can bring her along." As winter gradually released its grip on the mountain, the rhythm of life in the cabin expanded to include new patterns. Amanda began learning bookkeeping basics from Joseph, practicing on Margaret's household accounts. Hannah grew stronger daily, her premature status becoming irrelevant as she hit developmental milestones with determined consistency. Margaret, perhaps most transformed of all, reclaimed pieces of herself long abandoned. She brought out her midwifery journals, sharing stories of difficult deliveries and miraculous outcomes. She contacted former colleagues, reconnecting with a professional community she had severed ties with decades earlier. Most significantly, she began corresponding more openly with Hope, sharing news of Amanda and Hannah without the veil of shame that had colored their relationship for so many years. The locked door beneath the stairs, the one that had caught Amanda's attention during her midnight wanderings, was finally open. Inside was a small room that Robert had originally built as a home office, but that Margaret had transformed into a shrine of sorts to Rebecca. School photos lined the walls alongside report cards, artwork, and other mementos of a life cut short. Most poignantly, a bassinet contained the items Rebecca had collected for her own baby. A hand-knitted blanket she had made during her hidden pregnancy, a small stuffed rabbit, a silver rattle that had been Margaret's as a child. I couldn't bear to look at these things after she died, Margaret explained as she showed Amanda the room for the first time. But I couldn't bear to get rid of them either. So they've been locked away like my grief, present but not acknowledged. Amanda absorbed the weight of this revelation, understanding how profoundly Margaret's decision to help her had altered the older woman's relationship with her past. What will you do with it now? Margaret surveyed the room thoughtfully. Transform it, I think. Keep the memories of Rebecca, but make space for new ones too. Hannah should know about her. Not just the tragedy, but the joy and promise she represented. Spring arrived on the mountain with explosive green energy, as if nature was making up for winter's extended stay. The forest around the cabin erupted with new growth, and Margaret suggested they start a garden together. Every child should know where food comes from, Margaret explained as they stood on the cabin's front porch, surveying the area where snow had finally melted to reveal rich, dark soil. And every child should understand that good things take time to develop. Amanda held Hannah against her shoulder, the baby's alert eyes taking in everything with fascination. At 3 months old, Hannah had developed into a remarkably content baby, sleeping well and smiling often as if she understood she was surrounded by people who would do anything to ensure her happiness. Margaret had ordered seed catalogs over the winter, and their kitchen table was now covered with packets of heirloom varieties representing both tradition and hope for the future. Tomatoes that had been grown by Margaret's grandmother, beans that had sustained her family through difficult years, flowers that would attract beneficial insects while adding beauty to their practical efforts. This packet of sunflower seeds came from plants Robert and I grew with Rebecca, Margaret said, holding up seeds that looked unremarkable but carried decades of family history. She was 8 years old and she insisted on planting them in a perfect circle around the cabin. That summer, we were surrounded by flowers that stood taller than she was. Amanda tried to picture a young Rebecca running between giant sunflowers, her laughter echoing across the mountain meadow. The image brought both sadness for the woman she would never meet and gratitude for the legacy of love that had brought Hannah into existence. We'll plant them again, Amanda said simply. Hannah should grow up with Rebecca's sunflowers. As they worked together to prepare the garden beds, Margaret shared knowledge passed down through generations of women who understood that growing food was both practical skill and spiritual practice. She showed Amanda how to test soil by feeling its texture, how to judge proper spacing by understanding each plant's mature size, how to time plantings by reading natural signs rather than relying entirely on calendar dates. The work was therapeutic for them both, connecting them to each other, to the land, and to a future they were literally planting seed by seed. Hannah observed from her portable crib, her dark eyes following their movements with the intense focus of someone studying important information. Look at her watching us, Amanda observed. It's like she's already learning. Margaret nodded, not pausing in her careful placement of pea seeds. Children absorb more than we realize. She's learning that work can be satisfying, that taking care of living things matters, that the people who love her collaborate instead of competing. Joseph and Dr. Wilson became regular fixtures in this new routine, each contributing in ways that expanded the tight circle of their makeshift family. Joseph built raised garden beds that would be easier for Margaret to tend as she aged, while Dr. Von Wilson brought specialized baby-friendly plants for a sensory garden section designed specifically for Hannah as she grew. On a particularly warm April day, as Margaret and Amanda worked side by side in the new garden, a sleek silver SUV with Colorado plates wound its way up the mountain road. The unfamiliar vehicle immediately put them on alert. Visitors were common now, but they usually drove trucks or practical sedans suited to mountain living. Joseph, who had been reinforcing the garden fence, straightened up and moved protectively closer to the women and Hannah. His wariness spoke volumes about how deeply the wellness check had affected them all, creating a lingering sense of vulnerability despite their victory. The SUV parked beside Margaret's truck, and a woman in her early 40s stepped out, followed by a man of similar age and 3 children ranging from elementary to high school age. The woman paused, taking in the scene before her with visible emotion, then raised her hand in a tentative wave. Margaret froze the trowel in her hand, dropping to the soft earth. "Hope," she whispered, shock and joy mingling in her voice. "Hope's here." The moment hung suspended in time, Margaret standing absolutely still in her garden dirt on her hands and wonder on her face. Hope taking hesitant steps toward the woman who had given birth to her mother. Two families connected by loss and love, meeting for the first time in the physical world after years of letters and phone calls. Surprise! Hope called, her voice carrying traces of nervous laughter. I hope it's okay that we came without calling first. Cell reception gets spotty in the mountains, and I wanted to. Whatever she had planned to say was lost as Margaret crossed the space between them with remarkable speed for a woman in her 70s. The embrace that followed, tentative at first, then fierce and certain, bridged decades of separation. Amanda watched from a respectful distance, holding Hannah close, understanding the magnitude of this reunion. This was Hope, Rebecca's daughter, Margaret's granddaughter, Hannah's connection to a past that had seemed more shadow than substance until this moment. Introductions followed in a rush of emotion and awkward joy. Hope's husband, Michael, was a math teacher, solid and kind-eyed. Their children, Emma, 16, Jacob, 12, and Lily, 8, regarded the cabin and its inhabitants with varying degrees of curiosity and shyness. We've been planning to visit for months, Hope explained, as they all settled on the porch, the garden work forgotten in the wake of this more important cultivation. Ever since Grandmother Margaret told me about you and Hannah, it felt important somehow to connect all the pieces. The significance of Hope's presence created ripples that expanded throughout the day. For Margaret, seeing her granddaughter with her own children, Rebecca's grandchildren, was the closing of a circle she had never dared hope would be completed. For Amanda, meeting someone who had navigated the complex emotional terrain of being connected to this family through unconventional means offered a kind of validation she hadn't known she needed. For Hope herself, the visit seemed to answer questions she might not have fully articulated. About belonging, about legacy, about the complicated ways families form and reform around both tragedy and joy. It's strange, Hope confided to Amanda, as they prepared dinner together, the easy domesticity of the task creating space for deeper conversation. Growing up, I always knew I was adopted. My parents were wonderful, open about my history, supportive of my relationship with Grandmother Margaret. But there was always this gap, this sense of a story that started before me that I could never fully access. Amanda nodded, understanding intimately how it felt to be part of a narrative already in progress. And now being here, Hope looked toward the living room where Margaret sat, surrounded by her great-grandchildren, showing them the wooden toys Robert had carved for Rebecca decades earlier. Now I can see where I come from, not just genetically but spiritually. I can see the threads that connect us all, even across time and loss. The evening stretched into comfortable conversations that felt simultaneously new and familiar, as if these two branches of family had always been destined to intertwine. Hope's children warmed quickly to Margaret, recognizing in her the same qualities they loved in their mother: resilience, wit, and a capacity for unconditional acceptance. After the younger children had gone to bed, Hope brought out a package carefully wrapped in archival paper. I brought something I thought you might want to see, she told Margaret, gently placing it in her hands. My adoptive parents saved everything the agency gave them about my birth mother. Inside was a small collection of items that Rebecca had assembled for her unborn child. A letter written during her pregnancy expressing hopes and dreams for the baby she wouldn't live to raise. A bracelet with a silver charm. A photograph of herself as a child with Margaret and Robert. These fragments of Rebecca's brief life, preserved and returned after decades, completed another circle of healing. Margaret traced the handwriting on the letter with trembling fingers. I never knew she wrote to you. They never told us. She loved me, Hope said simply. She didn't know me, but she loved me enough to make sure I would know she wanted me, even if she couldn't keep me. The raw emotion of this exchange, the daughter Rebecca never raised comforting the mother who had lost her, created a profound moment of reconciliation. Not just between Margaret and Hope, but between Margaret and her own past choices, her own grief. I think, Margaret said slowly, each word weighted with realization, that Rebecca would be so happy to see us all together like this. To know that the love didn't stop with her, that it continued and expanded to include Amanda and Hannah, your family, all of us. Hope's visit lasted 3 days. Not nearly long enough to satisfy Margaret's heart, but enough to establish a new reality where connections once maintained primarily through letters and occasional phone calls were now anchored in physical presence and shared experience. They parted with promises of summer visits, holiday gatherings, a newly expanded definition of family that transcended traditional boundaries. As spring blossomed into early summer, the garden thrived under Margaret and Amanda's combined care. Hannah grew stronger and more interactive daily, delighting in the sensory experiences of outdoor life. Amanda began her part-time work at the Veterans Thrift Store, bringing Hannah with her 3 days a week and finding unexpected fulfillment in the simple bookkeeping tasks that kept the charitable organization running smoothly. Margaret's transformation continued as well, her reputation in the community gradually shifting from the recluse on the mountain to a respected elder with valuable skills and wisdom to share. Dr. Wilson persuaded her to speak with medical students at the regional hospital about rural midwifery, an experience that reconnected her to the professional identity she had abandoned decades earlier. One evening in late June, as they sat on the porch watching fireflies emerge from the surrounding forest, Margaret broached a subject that had been on her mind since Hope's visit. "I've been thinking about the future," she began, her voice thoughtful but determined. "About this cabin and what happens to it when I'm gone." Amanda's hands stilled on the baby blanket she was knitting. At 73, Margaret was healthy and vibrant, but the reality of mortality couldn't be ignored indefinitely. "Margaret, you don't need to." "I do need to," Margaret interrupted gently. "Making peace with my past doesn't mean ignoring practical considerations for the future." She pulled out papers she had been working on with quiet determination for several weeks. "I want to transfer ownership of the cabin and the land to you, Amanda. Officially, legally, permanently. I want this to be Hannah's inheritance, her foundation for whatever life she chooses to build." Amanda felt the world tilt slightly. "I can't accept that. This place is your home, your life's work. It should stay in your family." "You are my family," Margaret replied with gentle firmness. "You and Hannah are the most important family I've ever had. This cabin needs to belong to people who will fill it with love and laughter and the sound of children growing up safely." Margaret's lawyer had prepared comprehensive documents addressing every possible concern. Amanda would become the legal owner, but Margaret would retain lifetime residence rights and decision-making authority for as long as she was able to exercise it. The arrangement protected Margaret's security while ensuring the property's future. "But Margaret, the financial implications, this place must be worth—" "Money isn't the point," Margaret interrupted. "Legacy is the point. Making sure that what Robert and I built here continues to serve its purpose long after we're both gone." Amanda studied the papers, trying to understand the magnitude of what was being offered. The cabin and its surrounding land represented not just financial security, but generational stability for Hannah. A place where she could always return, always belong, regardless of what other changes life might bring. "I have one condition," Margaret continued, her tone becoming more formal. "If you accept this gift, you have to promise me that this place will always be a sanctuary for people who need help. I don't care if it's pregnant women or families in crisis or just someone who needs a safe place to heal. Promise me this cabin will always serve people who need second chances." Amanda felt tears welling up as she understood the deeper meaning behind Margaret's generosity. This wasn't just about providing security for Amanda and Hannah. It was about creating a permanent legacy of the kind of radical kindness that had saved Amanda's life. "I promise," Amanda whispered. "I promise this place will always be a home for people who need one." Margaret's smile was radiant with satisfaction and relief. "Then we have a deal." The signing ceremony took place on a perfect summer afternoon, with Hannah sitting on Amanda's lap, reaching for the pen as if she wanted to participate in this momentous occasion. Margaret's lawyer served as witness along with Joseph and Dr. Wilson, who had become like family during their months of shared experience. "This feels too big," Amanda said as she signed her name to documents that would change everything. "I don't know how to thank you." "Live well," Margaret replied simply. "Raise Hannah to be kind and strong and generous. Help other people when they need it. That's all the thanks I need." As they celebrated with a dinner featuring vegetables from their garden and a cake Joseph's daughter had baked for the occasion, Amanda marveled at how completely her life had been transformed. 8 months ago, she had been a homeless pregnant woman facing an uncertain future alone. Now she was a mother, a homeowner, and part of a family that had chosen each other across the barriers of age, background, and circumstance. "What should we do first?" Amanda asked as they sat on the front porch, watching Hannah explore the texture of grass with intense concentration. "We should start planning for the future," Margaret replied. "If this place is going to be a sanctuary for people who need help, we should be prepared to feed more than just ourselves." Amanda looked around at the cabin that was now legally hers but would always feel like Margaret's gift of love and faith. The mountains rose majestically in the distance, unchanged by human dramas, but witness to the stories that unfolded in their shadow. Somewhere on those peaks, summer was revealing new growth that had been waiting also winter for the right moment to emerge. "Margaret," Amanda said softly, "I love you." The words, simple but profound, hung in the mountain air between them, an acknowledgement of the bond that had formed between a young woman at her most vulnerable and an older woman who had found her way back to her truest self through the act of helping another. "I love you both more than I ever thought it was possible to love anyone," Margaret replied, her voice steady with certainty. "You gave me back my purpose, my joy, my reason for getting up in the morning. You made me remember who I was always meant to be." Hannah's first birthday party was everything Amanda had dreamed of during those uncertain months of pregnancy, but had never dared to believe might actually happen. The cabin's living room was decorated with handmade banners created by Margaret's steady hands, and the kitchen table groaned under the weight of contributions from their extended community. Betty Patterson, who had initially been among the most skeptical townspeople, had provided a cake decorated with delicate sugar flowers that must have taken hours to create. The quilting circle had made a special birthday quilt featuring appliqued images of mountains, pine trees, and a small cabin that looked remarkably like their home. Dr. Wilson and his wife had brought a collection of children's books that would last Hannah well into her elementary school years. But the most precious gift came from Margaret herself, a wooden rocking horse carved by her own hands during the long winter evenings when Hannah slept peacefully and Amanda studied for her college courses by lamplight. The craftsmanship was exquisite, every surface sanded smooth and finished to a lustrous glow that invited touching. "Robert would have loved making this for his granddaughter," Margaret said as she presented the gift to Hannah, who immediately reached for the carved mane with the determined focus of a one-year-old with strong opinions about what deserved investigation. Amanda watched Hannah explore her new toy and marveled at how completely normal this felt. Sitting in a room full of people who cared about her daughter's happiness, being part of a community that had gradually shifted from judgment to acceptance to genuine affection. The transformation wasn't universal. Eliza Matthews and her circle still maintained a cool distance, but the cabin had become a place where people felt welcome, where the shadow of past tragedy had been replaced by the light of new beginnings. Hope and her family had returned for the celebration, bridging the geographic distance between Colorado and the Blue Ridge Mountains to ensure Hannah's first birthday included all branches of her unconventional family tree. Hope's children had already developed a deep attachment to Hannah, treating her with the proprietary affection of cousins despite the absence of a direct blood relationship. "Tell us about your summer plans, Amanda," Hope asked as the party wound down and the adults settled into comfortable conversation while Hannah napped in Margaret's arms. "I'm going to start working at the community center 3 days a week," Amanda replied, her voice carrying pride and excitement, "helping with their new early childhood program. It's perfect experience for my education degree, and it means Hannah can come with me to work." Margaret's face glowed with satisfaction as she listened to Amanda's plans. The transformation from desperate young woman to confident mother and student had been remarkable to witness. But Margaret understood that Amanda's success came from her own strength and determination. She had simply provided the safe space necessary for that strength to emerge. "And what about the sanctuary program?" Dr. Wilson asked. "Are you still planning to formalize that?" Amanda and Margaret exchanged glances. They had been working with social services to establish the cabin as an official resource for women facing crisis pregnancies, a place where they could receive support without judgment while making decisions about their futures. "We've had 2 families stay with us since winter," Margaret replied. "Both situations worked out well. I think we're ready to make it more official." Amanda nodded agreement. "We want to be careful about it, make sure we can provide real help instead of just good intentions. But yes, I think it's time to honor the promise I made when Margaret gave me this place." As the celebration continued into the evening, Amanda took a photograph of Hannah sitting in Margaret's lap, both of them laughing at something only they found amusing. The image captured everything beautiful about their unconventional family. The security, the deep affection that had grown from crisis into something permanent and life-sustaining. Later, after the guests had departed and Hannah was sleeping peacefully in her crib, Amanda and Margaret sat on the front porch, watching stars emerge in the mountain sky. "Do you ever regret it?" Amanda asked quietly, "taking in a stranger who turned your quiet life upside down?" Margaret was quiet for a long moment, considering the question seriously. "I regret that it took me so long to understand what really mattered. I regret the years I spent hiding from life instead of engaging with it. But regret taking you in never. Not for a single moment." Amanda reached for Margaret's hand, their fingers interlacing with the easy familiarity of people who had shared both crisis and joy. "I keep thinking about all the things that had to go wrong for everything to go right," she mused. "David leaving me, losing my apartment, ending up homeless in a snowstorm. If any of those things had happened differently, I never would have found you." "Maybe that's how grace works," Margaret replied thoughtfully. "Maybe the worst things that happen to us sometimes lead us to the best things we never knew we needed." Inside the cabin, Hannah stirred in her sleep, making the small sounds of a child who was dreaming peacefully in a place where she was completely safe and unconditionally loved. The sound carried through the open window like a benediction, a reminder that some stories do have the endings their characters deserve. 5 years had passed since that snowy night when Amanda collapsed outside Margaret's cabin, and the woman who now sat at the kitchen table writing in her journal bore little resemblance to the desperate, frightened girl who had once been too proud to ask for help. Amanda had graduated with her education degree, was working full-time as a kindergarten teacher, and had become a respected voice in the community's efforts to support families in crisis. Margaret, now 78, but still vital and engaged, had returned to midwifery on a limited basis, working with the county health department to provide care for women in remote mountain communities. Her gentle competence and decades of experience had made her a treasure among younger medical professionals who sought her guidance on complex cases. But it was their work together that had truly transformed both their lives and their community. The cabin had officially become Hannah's Haven, a registered nonprofit organization that provided temporary housing and support services for pregnant women facing difficult circumstances. In 5 years, they had helped 37 women navigate crisis pregnancies, and 35 healthy babies had been born to mothers who might otherwise have faced their challenges alone. Margaret's journal, which she had begun keeping the day Amanda arrived, had become a record of transformation that amazed even her. The entries from those early days showed a woman struggling with grief and isolation. The recent entries revealed someone who had found profound purpose in service to others. "Amanda stopped by today with wonderful news," Margaret wrote in her careful handwriting. "The state legislature is considering a bill that would provide funding for programs like ours. Amanda will testify about the importance of supportive housing for women in crisis. I could not be more proud of the advocate she has become." Hannah, now a confident 5-year-old with her mother's dark eyes and Margaret's practical wisdom, had grown up understanding that their home was a special place where people came when they needed help. She had learned to be gentle with the women who stayed with them, had absorbed lessons about kindness and service that most children never had the opportunity to experience firsthand. "Mama Margaret," Hannah said, using the name she had created for the woman who functioned as her grandmother in every way that mattered. "When I grow up, can I help take care of people too?" Margaret set down her pen and pulled Hannah onto her lap, marveling as always at how naturally this child had learned to love without conditions or limitations. "Of course you can, sweetheart. But you know what? You're already helping take care of people. Every time you share your toys with the babies who visit us, every time you help me make cookies for someone who's feeling sad, you're taking care of people." Hannah considered this seriously, as she did most things. "Is that why Mama Amanda teaches little kids? Because teaching is taking care of people." "That's exactly right. Your mama teaches children because she understands how important it is for every child to feel safe and loved and capable of learning." As if summoned by their conversation, Amanda appeared in the kitchen doorway, her face glowing with excitement and something that looked like nervous anticipation. "I have news," she announced, settling into her chair at the table where so many important conversations had taken place over the years. "I've been offered a position with the state education department, developing programs for early childhood education in rural communities." Margaret and Hannah looked at her expectantly. Amanda's voice carried pride mixed with uncertainty. It would mean traveling some, but I could work from home most of the time. Margaret's smile was immediate and radiant. That's wonderful news. You'll be able to help children all across the state instead of just in our district. But there's something else. Amanda continued, her tone becoming more serious. I've also been contacted by a publisher who wants me to write a book about our experience here, about how communities can support women and children in crisis. Margaret felt her breath catch. The idea of their story reaching a wider audience, possibly inspiring similar programs in other communities, filled her with a sense of completion she hadn't expected. What kind of book, she asked. A combination of memoir and practical guide. Our story, but also information about how other communities could create similar programs. The publisher thinks it could make a real difference. Margaret looked around the kitchen where this conversation was taking place, the same room where she had first offered Amanda shelter and where they had made the decision to formalize their family. Everything had grown from that initial choice to extend kindness without conditions. I think, Margaret said slowly, that this is exactly what should happen next. Your story, our story, needs to be shared not because it's unique, but because it shows what's possible when people choose love over fear. Hannah wiggled off Margaret's lap and ran to retrieve something from the living room. She returned carrying the framed photograph from her first birthday party, the image that captured the joy and security that had defined her early years. Will you put this picture in the book? Hannah asked, holding up the photograph that showed 3 generations of chosen family celebrating together. Amanda took the picture and studied it, seeing in their faces the evidence of transformation that had seemed impossible just a few years earlier. Margaret's expression showed peace and purpose. Amanda's own face reflected confidence and hope, and Hannah herself embodied the security that comes from being unconditionally loved. Yes, Amanda said softly. I think this picture tells the whole story.